Hello and welcome to Answering the Call, the Voices of Maine Veterans. And today we're talking with Angela Baker, who is a veteran, a full-time service member from the Maine National Guard, who is now retired and working for the Veterans Administration in benefits. So we're going to talk about her career in the National Guard, but also what she's doing now and talk a little bit about that transition. Angela, thank you for joining us. We're delighted to be able to talking to you. I will certainly thank you for your service, but I'll begin by doing that as well. Tell me first, how did a girl from Buckfield, Maine, end up joining the Maine National Guard?
It's a great question, Senator, and thank you for having me. I grew up in a very small town, and my dad was a veteran, and most of the men in my family were, with a few of the women in my family. And ever since I was a little girl, I just wanted to be in the military. I didn't know what branch, though. That came later on in life when I figured it out. But ever since I was very young, I wanted to be in.
Well, now I heard that the ice storm of 1998 had something to do with it. Tell me that story.
It did. By the time I was in high school, I thought I was gung ho for the Marine Corps, and we had a recruiter from the Maine Army National Guard come in and speak with the juniors and seniors of our high school, and it was right after the ice storm, and I found it intriguing that there was so many Guard members and soldiers that were helping my neighbors, and I saw them everywhere clearing roads and cutting down trees and helping people shovel out, bringing hot meals to them in remote locations. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to serve my community and help my neighbors, and that would be the perfect fit. So after the ice storm and seeing that, just months later, that recruiter stopped in, and immediately I was like, pick me, I want to join.
Well, that's one of the unique things about the National Guard is that it has a dual role. It has a role in the state, serving the state in times of emergency, as you noted during the ice storm, but also serving the country in national demand. So we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But of course, the ice storm was a huge part of my work as governor, and that's when I really came to deeply appreciate the value of the National Guard. I think the ice storm was the largest call up of the National Guard in the state. And as you say, they were doing all kinds of things. I thought one of the most interesting things, we had bucket truck and electrical drivers from across the country, well, from at least as far away as North Carolina, and they didn't know anything about Maine. So the National Guard, we called them bird dogs. And the National Guard members would lead these guys from around the country to Woodford's Corner or East Corinth and someplace that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get. But they also set up cots. They set up emergency shelters. It was an extraordinary moment, and the National Guard rose to the occasion. Well, let's go on from when you joined. So what happens next? You're a junior in high school. So did you went off for some training even before you finished high school, didn't you?
I did. So I needed my parents' permission. I was 17 years old, so they had to sign the contract with me. And of course, my mom was awfully nervous. My dad was like, yeah, she's doing it. I knew it. And my mom was more hesitant, but I just looked at them. I said, you can sign it now, or I'll just do it in the year myself. So it's up to you, but I want to go now. This is what I want to do. And that's pretty much all my mom needed to hear. So right after my junior year of high school, I attended my basic training course down at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And upon graduating boot camp, I came back for my senior year of high school. And then
So when kids are mowing lawns and being nannies, you were at boot camp in the summer between your junior and senior year in high school.
It was, yes. Yep. I came back and I was in good shape, which was perfect because it was soccer season. So my preseason was spent doing obstacle courses and land nav and running a lot. doing lots of push-ups. Yep,
So,
I was ready.
so technically, during your senior year in high school, you were a member of the National Guard. Had you been sworn
Yes.
in, or were you still in some kind of training status?
Uh, so I was an actual member, and what I would do is I would drill on the weekends. I remember having like a basketball game or a soccer game, and then suiting up right into my the old green BDUs when we had shiny black boots back then. It was back in '99, and I would be leaving my high school like that in uniform, so my mom or my dad could give me a ride to drill.
Wow. Now, what did your other classmates think of this? I mean, you must have been. I mean, this is unusual to be actually in the Guard while you're still in high school. Did you get questions about it? Did they wonder what in the world you were up to?
Uh, Actually, a few of them ended up joining. I think there was like 5 of us that they signed up shortly after I did, and we actually ended up all deploying together. We were all with the same battalion later on. Uh, but for the most part, everyone was really supportive, and they just thought it was excellent what I was doing. So I had full support from the teachers and coaches and everything if I had to miss anything.
Well, I think I've only met one other person who was from Buckfield. I'm pretty sure I'm right. A guy named Patrick Dempsey,
Yep.
the actor. Isn't that right?
And it's funny that you know that he's actually from Buckfield because a lot of people they think Lewiston because it's the bigger town next door. But yes, his mom was actually my the secretary at my high school, Amanda.
Oh,
I
that's
knew her very
great.
well.
Well, he's a wonderful guy who's never lost his roots in small town Maine. He's
Mm.
an international movie star, but as he's done so much for Maine, as you know. Well, let's go back to your career. So you graduate from high school. What happens then?
After high school, I went down to Gulfport, Mississippi for my AIT. It's my MOS school to get trained for carpentry and masonry. That was what I enlisted as, to be carpenter and mason. Um,
Notice
to
anything different about the weather in Gulfport, Mississippi?
I thought I was going to die as soon as I stepped off the plane. I went into like this big air conditioning part of the airport, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't bad. It looks like it might be sunny out. It's probably hot." And I walked out, and I felt like I had just walked right into an oven. It was terrible. I had never had like been exposed to heat like that, and here we are, Mississippi in June, July, and August. It
So
was
you were trained in carpentry and masonry. Did you end up doing any carpentry and masonry in the Guard, or did you move on to other skills?
No, we did a lot of AT projects at various locations throughout the state where we did anything. I ended up not doing as much masonry, but construction stuff, anything from siding to roofing on projects like at rec fields out in China. We did a concession stand there when I was 19, I think. 18 or 19. And we had gone to San Diego, California for an AT that might have been when I was 19 that
Okay.
we went to San Diego and we worked on the border there.
For our listeners, AT means,
Annual training,
okay, so the annual training would consist of, in many cases, doing projects around Maine for the communities.
correct. It's our 2 weeks a year where the National Guard likes to embed themselves within the community to complete projects.
Now,
And as they
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Just as we complete projects throughout the state, it's a way for us to practice our skill set that we have, as well as serving our community at the same time. So it's always a hand in hand with the community, and it could be anywhere in the
So,
state. And
so after you returned from the training in Mississippi, you were in Maine doing
Mhm.
Project Maine, and then all of a sudden comes a deployment. Talk to me about that. I'd like to. I want your reaction the minute you found out you were going to go overseas.
I predicted that we were going to go overseas when I watched uh, the second plane fly into the towers. Um, I was working at Camp Keys, and I was 20 at the time, I think. And I was on state active duty orders there, and I had worked construction for a while, and at this point in time, I was working in the accounting office. And we had heard on the radio that something had happened in New York, and everyone, it was right around lunchtime, and everyone rushed to the little cafe that we had. There was a little TV up in the corner. And I remember watching the second plane hit the tower, and I said to myself, I'm going to be out of the state before long. And I knew it right then and there. That's what was going to happen. Um,
When you when you came back to Maine from Mississippi, you were full time. You weren't a part time National Guard that did weekends and a few and trainings. You were a full time. You were full time for the National Guard, right?
Eventually, yes. What happened was I was on state active duty orders for a while, and then I did an interview for what's called an AGR, which is an active guard reserve position. So that back in 2003 is when I was hired on active duty, as officially active duty in August of
So you
2003.
you knew on September 11th that you were bound, that there'd be a huge follow up to this, and that you were likely to see service abroad.
Yes, yes. And how it normally goes in the military is you have your active duty components. They ship out first if there's going to be anything that happens. And the National Guard is usually like the backfill that comes in afterwards. So I didn't think that we would be there right away, but I knew that I would have a turn at this. Um, and so when I was hired AGR as active, I had just had my first son. He was born the end of May of 2003. And then in August, I was hired active duty. And by November of 2003, we were activated.
And so that's when you knew you were going to be activated and going overseas. Boy, that's a big year. A child and uh, going active duty, and then now when were you deployed?
Um, our when I was alerted, I was down in Fort Dix, New Jersey. I had just done my PLDC, which is a primary leadership development course. So in order for me to get my sergeant stripes for the job that I was doing, I had to go down to my professional development school, which was PLDC. And the day I graduated, that in November, I got a call from my section sergeant saying, "Hey, we're being activated. You have a couple of days to get your stuff together and report to the armory," which was in Gardner at the time. I was with battalion headquarters in the S1. And so I got home, packed up my apartment, and got everything I could ready. And then I was doing long shifts at the Gardner Armory. We were supposed to, at that time, we had like a 3-week notice to be at Mob Station, which was Fort Drum, New York. But it got extended where we had such a missing gap of soldiers. We had to get a bunch of cross levelers, but to fill all the gaps from New York. So we were allowed a little extra time. So we got to stay home for Christmas. And right after the new year in January, we went to Fort Drum, New York to start our validation for mobilization training to go to Iraq.
And how long were you in Fort Drum, and when did you go to Iraq?
We got to Fort Drum beginning of January. I remember I spent my 22nd birthday there. So my birthday is January 10th. And I turned 22 in Fort Drum. And by the end of February, I think it was the 23rd. By the end of February, we were leaving Fort Drum to fly overseas to land in Kuwait, and we spent a couple of days in Kuwait to fly into Iraq.
And was this '04?
Yes, it was the beginning of '04.
And what was the mission? What was the battalion's mission over there?
So we were to build anything from, so where we were in Mosul, Iraq, and we were replacing another engineer company. So we were like the second wave of engineers that came into this particular base, or a FOB, forward operating base. And our mission was to continue with the security and the hardening, is what's called the hardening of the base, which means filling HESCOs. And where we were engineers, we had the front loaders and the different equipment to fill those very tall barriers, the HESCO barriers, with dirt, and then push them to the outer perimeter. So that way we'd have an outer perimeter and an inner perimeter around our base. So we did that. We built hospitals, schools, police checkpoints. We had people doing different companies and platoons doing missions throughout the northern province of Kurdistan, and doing some schools and helping the community there rebuild.
So basically, it was you were doing the infrastructure, the civil construction that enabled our people and supportive Iraqis to be protected, to live, to have a place to sleep. It was construction basically, and you were a sergeant at this point.
Yes.
You don't
Yep.
strike sergeant. I think of sergeants as people who yell a lot. I don't. Is that miss that?
I can. I do have a very loud voice. I don't have a good inside voice at all. My husband's always like, Ange, inside voice. I'm like, I don't have that. I think my kids would tell you the same thing.
Well, maybe there is something to that. So in Mosul, and I understand you were there for a tragic occurrence at a suicide bomber. To describe that.
So where I worked in the S1, it was my team. We would go get the mail across the street from our base where our FOB was. There was another FOB right across, which was an airfield. And we would go get the mail there and bring it over. It was right before Christmas, just a few days before Christmas. So we're like, oh, we're going to have a lot of mail. So we're going to go to Chow early and head back and get our trucks and go over. So we had gone up to Chow like an hour earlier than we normally do. And I had recalled when I left, I had spoken to a couple of people. There was one kid that I played basketball with. That was like the one downtime part that we had. We had a nice base on gym, a nice gym on the base. And it was the best way to relieve stress there is I would just play basketball all of the time. So I met like all of these guys because no other girls played. So I was usually the only female that was playing basketball. And I knew a bunch of the guys from all over the nation that had, stopped their lives to come serve their country. Some of them were college basketball players, and they were looking at some pretty significant career opportunities, and I found them super interesting. So I would be in the chow hall and I'd see some of them and they were like, hey, we're going to do a tournament in a couple of days. You coming up? I was like, yep, I'll be there. And then my team and I left right after I talked to this one young man. And I remember there was a group of Iraqi soldiers. They were called the ING, the Iraqi National Guard. They had a small portion on our base. They were in the middle, like they had a barracks area. And so we shared the base with them. And typically they would have to go in through a certain gate where we had a bomb sniffing dog there. It was a civilian gate, and the ING was supposed to go in through there. Well, apparently that day they didn't go through that gate, or else the dog would have alerted on this particular ING soldier. And as I was leaving, a big group of them had come in, and I heard afterwards that he had been wearing like a long coat, which seemed out of uniform for them. I was like, I remember that. So I had walked past him. He was the bomber, and I wasn't even 3 minutes from the chow hall when there was just this massive explosion, and like it shook the ground. You could feel it vibrate through your body. It was just such a powerful explosion, and I'm thinking, what was that? And I turned around, and I could see the smoke coming right out of the chow hall from the top of it. And our chow hall at the time was not a hard stand. It was like one of those big dome tents. So that was actually a good thing because the suicide bomber had a suicide vest, and it had ball bearings, little metal ball bearings that exploded. So it was for mass effect, is what it was. And when I saw the smoke and I could start to see people running around, I had a handheld radio, and I started running back to our area of operation, our AO, and I called Mass Cal over the radio, and I said, everyone in your trucks, let's go. We need to get up to the chow hall. There's Mass Cal, Mass Cal. And ran down to our aid station, which was right next to where my room was, and made sure that they were getting their stuff together. People were getting in trucks, and it was like this. You get such a big adrenaline rush, you don't always remember every little thing that happens, and it feels like it takes forever. Like in a dream when you're trying to run towards something and it feels like you're in quicksand. It was like that feeling. I could not get there fast enough, and we couldn't get everyone up there fast enough is what it felt like. And we finally get up there, and it was what I call organized chaos. We had even one of our soldiers helping call in a medevac for a helicopter. We had all of these different types of vehicles, not even ambulances, that were backing up to load the wounded onto the back of trucks, because the hospital that we had was actually across the street where the airfield was. So everyone had to be transported, loaded and transported across the street. And for a drive, it was like maybe a 3 or 4 minute drive to get there, but we started loading everyone. And I remember just seeing some of the craziest things, like this one soldier coming out that was wrapped in all cellophane. We had like these tables where you could pack up your food and take it with you. So they had these big cellophane rolls, and you would just pull it out and then wrap your food. Well, this one soldier had what's called a sucking chest wound. The ball bearings had gone through his chest and his gut, and he was just wrapped in cellophane to help suction everything. And that was a very common sight to see. So there was a lot of cellophane soldiers that day.
What was
We
what was the extent of the casualties? How many wounded? How many killed?
I think the total number was 42 wounded and 21 killed. It was the biggest, deadliest attack during a single attack during this time of the war. Um, and I know that afterwards, our company, our battalion lost 2 soldiers. We lost 2 that were in the chow hall. The young gentleman I had spoken about, talking about basketball, he was killed. He was from Virginia. And my best friend that was a girl there, she was also from Virginia, same company. I thought she was hurt. I knew she was hurt because I had just spoken with her, but I saw her shortly after everything calmed down. She was able to get word to me that she was okay, but she had a concussion. Um, so that that day, really not a good day. Not not a good day, but the amount of people that just reacted. Like there wasn't people, no one was crying and freaking out. It was just organized chaos. You have people that are hurt, and like it's like everyone's training kicked in. It didn't matter if you were National Guard, Army, Navy. We had a group of firefighters there, and everyone just like all of their combat life-saving skills came in, and they were doing whatever they could to patch up soldiers and ship them over to the hospital.
Well, I think one of the most remarkable things you've said is that when you heard the explosion and saw the smoke, you ran toward it, not away from it. And I take it that that's what most people did. They were headed there to see how they could help. They weren't trying to leave the scene.
That's true. I never thought of it like that. Never once had I even that never crossed my mind, Senator. It was That's why we signed up, I guess. The same thing as first responders. You usually run toward the fire or the shooting. You don't run away. And that's where everyone ran. Everyone ran to it, drove to it, and did whatever
Ironically,
they could.
so significantly later, Mosul was the scene of one of the most long and vicious battles against ISIS. But that
Mm.
was later. But it turned out it was one of the most difficult because it was urban warfare. Uh, so, how much longer were you there after this incident?
We were there a year in country. So we were there 12 months. Um, and a part of our other mission was base security. So we all had, like, our companies would go out and assist with the different community projects. At the battalion side and the headquarters side, we would help with the base security. So we would have tower duty and gate duty too. And I was working at the civilian gate this one day, and it came right off the traffic circle. It was like this long walkway of Jersey barriers, and that came right from the traffic circle, which was there was a lot of activity all there all of the time. Where it was outside of the base, it was a hot spot, and so we get civilian traffic in there as like not cars but foot traffic, as we had some contractors that would work on the base. And this one particular day, bus loads and car loads had come up from the south of ISIS, and they just started attacking all of the police stations.
Wow.
And so I saw mushroom clouds all over the city. The entire day, there was just like these mushroom clouds exploding all over the city, and we had a front row seat. That was I don't remember which month that was, to be honest, but that was also, we found out from intel that those fighters had come up on buses, and they started to overthrow every single police station and police checkpoint that they came across. And there was several within the city because there's millions of people in Mosul.
And when you were at that gate, were you armed? Were you a guard at the gate?
Hmm. Yeah, we would walk around with our weapons everywhere we went, and have our combat load, and uh, we would we weren't allowed to. We always had to have our weapons with us. We couldn't just go somewhere without them. So if I was playing basketball, there would be like a weapons guard on the side of the court with our stuff, and we'd usually still have our flak, our not flak vests, but our body armor off to the side. So if we ever had to gear up and run out and do anything, then that's what we would do. So we traveled everywhere with our gear. And
Boy,
while I
the
was
picture
sorry,
of playing basketball with all the gear and the arms on the side of the court. That ain't the NBA, but it's I think it's a good indication of the importance of having some outlet from the stress that you were under on an, I mean,
Hmm.
stress must have been constant. I mean, I suspect that you always in the back of your mind, particularly after that explosion, there must have been some thoughts of, when might something happen?
100%. And my biggest thing was I had my baby at home, and that was always, I need to get back for him. Everything is going to work out as it's supposed to. I know this. When I left, uh, he wasn't walking or crawling yet. He was still a little guy. And I took a onesie of his, and that's what I kept inside my Kevlar helmet that
Uh,
I wore. So I kept a onesie of his. Just as a, that daily reminder, like this, I'm doing this for him. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this so he doesn't have to go through this. That it was just that constant reminder of being there for the right reasons, and that I needed to come home safe. That was always like uppermost of my mind.
that's a really interesting point because when I've talked to combat veterans, they often talk about the immediate motivation is the people next to them, the
Hmm.
people they're with, and also their family, rather than abstractions about democracy or freedom and those kinds of things. And certainly, that's what you just said, was that your motivation, your most immediate motivation, was that onesie that you had in your helmet. That's quite an image.
It it was that one, everyone had something to motivate them while they were over there. A lot of people would carry pictures or letters, and being 22 years old and having that constant fear of today could be the day that I die. I mean, we had mortars and rockets launched at us constantly. You could just be walking and a mortar would drop right next to you, and you're like, okay, well, that was close.
Do you
So there's
develop a kind of fatalistic attitude that, I mean, there's not much you can do about where a mortar lands? Do you just get an attitude that if my number's up, my number's up, otherwise I'm going to be okay? I mean, what goes?
somewhat, yeah. I mean, I think everyone kept their head on a swivel. You were always listening. You could hear a whistle. So if you heard a whistle, you usually meant like something was incoming, something was being launched. So you would tend to like look around and be very watchful. Uh, it just everything was critiqued wherever we were. Like I said, we worked with ING, the Iraqi National Guard, and a bunch of civilians right from Mosul would be coming in, and they would work on the base for KBR. Um, Kellogg, Brown and Root. They were the ones that ran like our chow hall and stuff, and did the cleaning. So we had all of these civilians that were on the base at all times, and we were just constantly watching people. We get criticized like,
Not,
why are you staring?
not like a terrorist wears a sweatshirt that says "I am a terrorist." You've
Hmm.
got you've got to be watching everybody, and particularly the civilians who are on the base. So probably 99% of them are there to help.
The craziest, the one person I remember the most that came through the gate, I issued IDs when civilians would come on the post. So I'd have to take their weapons and then in exchange get their ID, then give them their contractor ID. And there was this one man that came in one day, blonde hair, blue eyes, very pale, and he spoke very, very good English. And I asked if he was from Iraq, and he goes, "Yes, born and raised here." And I asked him where he learned to speak English, and he said from watching Bugs Bunny. He watched cartoons, and
Huh.
that's where he learned all of his English was American cartoons. And he's not like that Middle Eastern, complexion that you would ever think. Um, Someone would look like. He was completely the opposite of what I would and what I had seen myself for like the common uh, complexion and how they would look. I was like,
Well,
my mind was blown.
I want to talk about your time after coming back from the deployment and also what you're doing now. But any other thoughts about what it was like to be there under fire and to realize the magnitude of the risk and the relationships that were developed?
Well, relationship wise, it's one big family. It's a brother and sisterhood, 100%. If you go through any type of event that is life altering, you're going to always have that tie with those people that experienced it with you, whether it be good or bad. You always have that connection, and that's what I still have with the folks that I deployed with, or is just the common language of speaking with another combat veteran and just being able to say, I understand. Okay. There's just, it's more commonplace. And I can have empathy instead of sympathy for folks. And when we had come back, I did notice that a lot of things were different. I know I was different, and I'm really glad that I had my guard family, as I called it, my military family, to help me through things, because I was definitely changed when I
Well,
came back.
that was going to be my next question. Talk to me about the trend. I just had this extraordinary experience, very much
Hmm.
anybody else in Buckfield or Lewiston or in the neighborhood. Um, and I suspect you had this sort of feeling of don't these all these people, they're all going about their everyday lives, don't they realize what I've just been through? I mean, that transition must be difficult.
I mean, I walked around fine. I was like, nope, I'm good. But I had a super quick temper. And I remember my sisters, my mom, and my dad, just everyone telling me, and just chill out. You don't need to bite someone's head off, or just, why are you so upset?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't know why I'm mad, but I had no patience. When I got home, I was angry. I was just angry with everything. And I know I got into a toxic relationship after I got home, and it was all due to like a lot of anger. And I finally uh, figured it out through counseling, because I'm not afraid to say it. I went and got anger management counseling because I was like, this is not me. I was never like this. I'm always a smiley person, the good attitude. We can do this. And I was just
Well,
raging on the
was was
inside all the time.
was this a form of PTSD?
Mm, I I don't know. I mean, I know I don't have that diagnosis or anything uh, on that perspective. I think for me, right after I come home, like I said, my son was like the most important thing to me. And when I got home, he wasn't even 2 years old yet. So I had missed his first birthday, and I had missed almost 2 years of his life completely. And so I had gotten this apartment, and I was going to get groceries this one day, and and I had him in the cart, and he wasn't really talking yet. He wasn't even two, and just going through the grocery store, and I didn't know what he liked to eat. I didn't know if he had food allergies. I didn't know if what kind of diapers, like what size. I didn't even know what size clothes he wore. And I remember feeling like the biggest pile of crap for a parent. And I just lost it in the grocery store, to the point where I had to call his dad. His dad and I, we were never married, but we maintain a good relationship. And I remember calling his dad, and I was like, I need your help. I can't do this. And I just felt like the worst mom that had ever lived, because I didn't know anything about my own kid. I was like, this is my son. I should know everything about him. And I literally don't know anything. And he only knew me through pictures. When I came home, he would point to my ID card that I had on my arm. And it was like, yep, that's mama. I was like, but I'm right here, bud. I'm right here. And he just kept pointing to my picture saying mama. Like, he would never look at me in the face for like the first few weeks that I was home. It was very odd.
Well, okay, so you're home, but you stayed
Hmm.
with an you stayed you stayed on active duty, right?
Yes. Yes, I stayed on active duty.
And what were your assignments? You were mostly here in Maine. I assume there were also training billets in other places.
Hmm. So I stayed in Maine. I went back to the Gardner Armory for a while, and after a couple years, after being home, I transferred to the state headquarters in Augusta, the old Camp Keys one. The base there, I say the old Camp Keys is still there, but part of it is at Camp Chamberlain now across the way. So I was at Camp Keys in the G1, which was it was administrative, um, and I was working on discharges there for a year and a half, and then I transferred to our Joint Forces Headquarters detachment to do admin and training, which was still at Camp Keys. And at that point, that's when I met my husband because he was also in. I met him through the military. Um, and
And
that was the,
you served under you enlisted under Earl Adams, I think was the adjutant general, and then Joe Tinkham, and then Bill
mhm,
Libby. You
yes.
you you served with some pretty great people. So now, okay, let's flash forward a full career, 20 years plus in the National Guard.
Hmm.
You transition out, and now you're working in the Veterans Administration, still serving your fellow veterans, right?
Yeah. Um, everyone was asking me, "Hey, when you retire, what do you want to do?" I was like, "I think I want to teach. I'd love to teach. I love being involved with our kids, and my husband and I, we coach within our community, and we're always volunteering for things. And I was like, I'd love to teach. So I did some subbing, but I still felt like there was more, and I missed like the whole veteran centric family. And I had thrown in some applications through USA Jobs, and I put in for a position with the VBA, Veteran Benefits Administration, and didn't got an interview. And I was shocked that I did, and I ended up getting hired. And uh, I got to be around veterans again, and I saw so many people that I knew that I hadn't seen in like almost 20 years. And I have people contacting me to this day, all the time saying, "Hey, and you're working there. Hey, do you remember this guy that we deployed with? Can you give me some information on this?" And so I'm still like this hub of information of trying to get word out to former soldiers. And veterans that I've served with, and get them any help that they need, or if they're trying to assist another family. uh, it's just another reason for service to keep giving back. It makes me
I
happy.
That's exactly what you're doing, and I would think it would be very satisfying to be at the VBA and be able to serve your fellow veterans. I want to go back just one question. Something I've been doing a lot of work on in Washington is the transition from active duty to civilian status. Now, you were here in Maine, and it wasn't like you were discharged at Fort Drum and then came back to Maine. But tell me
Right.
about the transition. Was that a difficult period, and what can we do to improve that?
Uh, for me, it wasn't difficult, I don't think. And it was more because my family's still here. We didn't have to move across the country. We didn't have we didn't move all of the time. So for us, I still had my roots, which is extremely important for military families and for those that are serving to have those roots set. So I don't feel like it was a big upset to me, but I remember going through, and when I was job hunting, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was like, okay, well, what can I tolerate? And that was one of those things. What can I tolerate? Because I still have a bit of a quick temper, nothing like after I got home from deployment. But I know I don't tolerate disrespect well. I will always say something and stick up for the little guy or whatever. I don't deal well with people that are extremely disrespectful and rude. And I was like, I don't think I can just be in any civilian sector. I don't think that will work for me.
I'm not sure I would advise you to go into politics. Uh, well, listen, Angela, what a pleasure to talk to you. And now, are you at Togus now? Is your office at Togus?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I work at Togas.
You're working with some great people there. Okay, I'm going to give you one bit of an assignment, both for right now and perhaps later.
Okay.
Uh, I'm privileged to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and that's another way of saying I know a guy. Uh, I have I'm in a place where I can do some good, and I want to. Let me know. I mean, off the top of your head, are there things that you think we should be working on in Washington? And then when we're off the air here, jot down some notes, because you're in a wonderful position to know the ins and outs of how the VA works and how the benefit system works and what we could do to improve it to make the lives of veterans better in Maine. So, any thoughts, immediate thoughts, and then I'm going to assign you to do some do some thinking. Maybe talk to some of your friends.
Immediately, what I think of is we have, it's a rural state, so our veteran population is very old, and they don't always get the opportunity to come to us. And that is probably the biggest factor that I see is someone needing to get a ride. And we have folks like DAV, and other volunteer organizations that will pick up veterans and bring them to us if they need to. But we need more. We always need more volunteers for drivers. We need more,
And,
the
and we
ability to reach more of our population that's in rural areas.
and be sure those volunteer drivers get reasonable compensation for the cost of making those trips. As I recall, the rate that they're paid per mile is reimbursed per mile is below cost. So that's something we need to work at. You've also been involved in the Legion, in the American Legion. That's
Hmm.
another way to continue your involvement with veterans, and certainly the VSOs provide enormous support and help.
Yes.
Uh, the other thing you mentioned, long-term care is going to be a huge issue coming at us because our veteran population is aging,
Hmm.
and we're really going to have to work on figuring that out. Home-based care is something I think we need to do a lot more of. Nobody wants to be in a nursing home. The question is, serve those needs, those people's needs, so they can stay in their home at least as long as possible.
You bring up a really great point because I know Mainers, they are hardy and stubborn, and you add a little bit of veteran in there too, and they're not going to want to leave their house. They're going to want to stay there. So that home-based care, that's a really excellent point, Senator. That is where they want to be. So I would 100% agree with you on that as more resources needed.
Well, that's something I think we're going to have to really pay some close attention to. And I know uh,
Hmm.
you'll be glad to know the Veterans Affairs Committee is the least partisan committee in the Senate. If you watch one of our hearings, you wouldn't know who was of which party, which is the way it ought to be, of course. But
Yes.
it's also, not surprisingly, one of the most productive committees in terms of getting bills actually out to the floor of the Senate and enacted into law. So maybe there's a lesson there about listening to one another and not always having your guard up on a partisan basis. But I don't want to get into political science. Listen, Angela, this has been wonderful. Thank you for your service. That goes without saying, but thank you so much for sharing what you have with us today. This interview will go into the archives at the Library of Congress, will be available to historians and others interested in the stories of our veterans, both in terms of their service in combat or throughout their service, but also what's become of them afterwards. So, thank you again for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. I hope to meet you in person up at Togus.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us today on Maine's Veterans Voices, Answering the Call. We've been talking to Angela Baker, a veteran of the Maine National Guard and of deployment to Iraq, and is now serving her fellow veterans at the Veterans Administration in Augusta at Togus. And this is Angus King, and thank you for being with us. We'll see you again next time on Maine's Veterans Voices.